This is When Science Speaks, a new web series profiling innovative and interesting people working in science and technical fields, from academia to industry to the nonprofit world. We explore how to be a powerhouse advocate for science and your research, how to advance your career in meaningful ways that make you happy, and how to push back on the ongoing assault on science and other related issues of interest happening in the world.
Hey everyone, it's Mark Bayer, and you are tuned to When Science Speaks. This episode of the show is sponsored by Bayer Strategic Consulting in Washington, D.C., which helps scientists get funding, gain influence, and build strategic relationships with the stakeholders who matter the most in their professional world. And reaching those goals often involves effective translation of complicated research into engaging, jargon-free communication that boils down complex topics to capture the attention of decision makers and general audiences. Interested in getting a free resource to help you do just that? Just go to complexitymadeclear.com to get the 11 keys for translating complexity. That's complexitymadeclear.com. to get your free infographic used by science communicators at major organizations to boil down, but not dumb down, complicated science and technical topics for key stakeholders. It is such a great pleasure to have Tony Bacigalupo and Jillian Benbow on the show today. Tony and Jillian are part of SPI Media, founded and led by the amazing Pat Flynn. Tony is the community program manager at Team SPI, where he's in charge of, among other things, boot camps and online summits, where small groups of people focus on particular aspects of their business that are key to company growth. Jillian is the senior community experience manager at Team SPI, and she runs SPI Pro, which is SPI Media's online private community where like-minded entrepreneurs can apply, and inside they can exchange ideas and resources while connecting with each other. Jill runs the day-to-day programming there. Both Tony and Jillian are longtime veterans of building vibrant and genuine communities that bring people together, long before community really was a thing or a corporate tagline, with Tony's specialty being the IRL community building, convening and spurring connections in the real world, and Jillian's focus being online community building. All right. So thanks so much for being here. And I'd love for you to tell us about your new podcast, the focus of it, and what you hope to add to the conversation. Jillian, do you want to kick us off, and then we'll go over to Tony?
Yeah, of course. Happy to. So our podcast is called The Community Experience, and it's under the umbrella of SPI Media. So if you're familiar with Pat Flynn, he hosts a couple shows, most notably Smart Passive Income show. And so we're kind of in that realm. We all work together. And Tony and I have both been working in community for a long time, but kind of in different corners of that world. So it was just a great opportunity to get us together and then talk to other people about the many fun things going on in the community world. And we both bring a different perspective, which always allows for really fun conversations.
Yeah, I have to say how much I've enjoyed this show. It is wonderful. And we'll obviously
Thank you.
Yeah, we'll have information about how to find it and all that good stuff in the show notes that accompany this episode. And Jillian, you referenced Tony's perspectives on community. Tony, share with us a little bit more about that, if you would.
Thanks, Mark, and great to be here. Thanks for having us. Yeah, so I have kind of a background in IRL community building. I got my start doing co-working communities back in the early days of 2007 or so, when working from home was just starting to be a thing. Not knowing that we were all going to be forced to do it a little while later. But I got a lot of experience running in-person community and working with community leaders, hosting events at my co-working space, things like that. And then along the way, got involved in the global co-working community of leaders and organizers worldwide, and got more involved in online community building in recent years, started doing online summits, things like that. And of course, in the last couple of years, have been spending a lot of time working on online community. And so I got a chance to start working with SPI last year, pretty similar to when Jill started, and we started working on SPI Pro together, our online paid membership community, and some of the other things. So it's been a heck of a ride.
Yeah, and you've seen it. You've been along and driving it for so long. So that begs the question, Tony. What really attracts you to community and bringing together both IRL and online and all these different contexts that you were just explaining?
Yeah, well, I like to think that anybody who gets involved in community as a leader probably did so for a reason. There's something that they didn't have fulfilled in the way that they saw things in the world, and they went out to create or helped cultivate that thing that they sought that they couldn't find. And so for me, I've been on a journey to find my belonging for a really long time. And part of why I got so attracted to co-working was because the first time I ever did co-working was in the living room of a guy who had invited people over his house. And it was the first time I was in a room of people where I really felt like I belonged. And I wanted more of that. I wanted other people to be able to find it, but it wasn't happening in the context and the frequency that I really wanted it to. And community leadership was born. But I think in the macro too, we have a massive issue around isolation and loneliness, people having issues finding their identity, and good, healthy, quality, well-facilitated community is a terrifically accessible antidote. There are a lot of big problems in the world that are hard to solve, and community and loneliness they're hard to solve, but they're not ones that are impossible to solve. Any one of us can do something to help contribute to addressing that.
It's so true. And Jill, I know you have a longstanding expertise and experience in building community as well. What makes it just so energetic and energizing for you?
It's funny because I sort of fell into community building and community management, and I'm the flip side of Tony. I've been in the digital space this whole time, not the IRL space. And so, it just kind of happenstance was a thing that I got involved in when it was in its earlier versions, I guess. But part of what keeps me in it and why I enjoy it so much and find it fulfilling is I have an intrinsic desire to help people. I always have. If someone's talking about something, I'm like, oh, you should meet this person. They could help you, get to that next step. I like finding ways to connect people in positive ways, of course. And so at SPI, it's just like kind of a culmination of all those things, because we're helping people who are trying to, or are very much succeeding in running their own businesses. So it's really satisfying to know I'm helping someone live their dreams. For, it sounds cheesy, but it's true. You look at the Great Resignation, and a lot of people are questioning if they want to be in that working model that we've all been in for so long. And with the remote work now, like Tony said, now everyone's doing it, but we were doing it well before it was a mandated thing. And people are just kind of questioning what value set they're going to prioritize. And it's turning a lot of people on to entrepreneurship. And so being able to help people do that and make a living on their terms, like, that's just, is this my job? Like, pinch me. It's great. I love it.
Yeah, that's so awesome. I mean, I remember reading Malcolm Gladwell's book, and I was like, yep, connector. That was definitely where I was at. It's not cheesy at all. I mean, it's so phenomenally empowering to then allow these people to get their voices and their ideas and their products, out in the world that can have, really bring about massive change that way. And I think we're all wired to need this, which kind of leads me into my next question, which is, the show, your podcast, at least so far, I know you're in the early stages of the episodes, and they've just been awesome to see that happening. But it really emphasizes the theme of connection and the value of connectedness. And Tony, you talked a little bit about loneliness and how we feel sort of when we don't have those feelings of connection. Would you like to add on a little bit to that, or what, sort of, what do you see when you are creating these opportunities and these spaces for connection in kind of the, the interactions that you're having with the people you're bringing together?
Yeah, Mark, I think that one of the things we're seeing is that, and one of the reasons we're doing this show is because community has become a buzzword. It's something that a lot of brands, a lot of companies are talking about, and I'm glad that that's the case. But I also want to make sure that people understand what it takes to build a community that's really going to provide enough value for it to be worth your effort. And ultimately, that comes down to meaningful connection between actual human beings. And that's something that you can teach. It's something that you can do at scale, but you can't do it in the way that you might do other things. You can't just broadcast community. You can't shove it down people's throats. It has to be facilitated between people. And that requires, a little bit of a shift in thinking for a lot of people. But ultimately, there's a huge hunger for it. There's a huge hunger. This was pre-pandemic, and now, even more so, that people want to feel like they belong. They want to feel like they have something meaningful to contribute. They want to feel like somebody is seeing them and appreciating them for who they are, and they want to feel valuable to others. And a lot of people are struggling with the fact that they're not finding those things as much as they need. And unfortunately, in some cases, that loneliness or that lack of feeling heard or seen leads to people getting pulled into unhealthy communities where they find belonging, maybe from a place of a negative. And so, it's an important thing. It's an incredibly important thing.
Yeah, that is so true. I mean, in talking to veterans, for example, who for years maybe were part of the organization, they were part of the armed services, they had this community, and then after they leave, then it's sort of like, well, who am I? What am I supposed to be doing? And there's a lot of recruiting on the far right that goes to former military. And it's not a surprise, but this craving, I think we all are just wired for, to be with others and to connect with others like that. And by doing it in such a productive, deliberate way, the way you both are, it has tremendous value for all of us, really. On a recent show, Jill, I think you may have you or Tony made the point where you distinguish between community and audience. And for folks who just aren't really familiar with what that distinction might be, what's the difference there? What do you have to say about that in your perspective? How do you see the difference between audience and community?
So much to say. Tony's laughing at me because I will get up on my soapbox. Yeah, there's definitely a distinction, and it's important to remember right now, community is very buzzwordy. Everybody's launching a community left and right. Many will fail, sadly, or maybe for the better. And part of that is understanding the distinction. So if my motivation to have a community is because I want everybody oohing and aahing over me and what I have to say, that's an audience. That's like going to a concert, right? I'm going to go to a concert. I love the band. Other people in the audience also love the band, but it's a transaction. I'm going and I'm experiencing what the band can do live. And then I'm going home and they're going to their next show, and they don't know who I am, nor do they really care, other than I'm part of the collective fan base, right? Versus a community is I'm going to the library to meet with 10 other people, and we're going to discuss a book that we all read last month. It's a book club, and I know everybody's name, or am getting to know everybody. I know a little bit about each person. They know a little bit about me. That's more of a community model. It's not the one to many. You're not on a rooftop shouting information. Like, that's an email list, right? You're interacting, and a big part of community. And I think a lot of people that have a large following are like, oh, I'll just launch a community and everyone will hang out there because they love me. That's a fan club. That's not a community. Community is it's not transactional. It's genuine. I want to hang out with you because we have a like interest. And we might bond over even other stuff. We might find out we also both love geckos, or, whatever it is. So that's my very brief explanation. I could just go on forever about it, but everyone's there to share together and collaborate, not to, receive information from one person.
And it is such a different experience to be in those different types of venues or interactions, and talking about the sharing and sort of finding commonality beyond just maybe the book or whatever. I think we get a dopamine rush from that, just feeling like, hey, there are other people out there like me, and I could feel heard and seen, as Tony was talking about. Tony, is there anything that you'd like to add to what Jill was just saying?
Yeah, well, I think that, it's an audience is consuming, right? They're there to receive what it is that you're creating and sharing with them. And a lot of things out there are consumption oriented, and it's perfectly fine. I think that the invitation and the challenge and the value when it's a community is to say, what happens when I relinquish a bit of control over this experience and narrative and challenge people to create an experience for each other and to create connection between one another. And that could be a very different thing. And so I think, the reason that we draw that distinction is because I think a lot of brands, a lot of initiatives out there are essentially doing audience building campaigns, but using the word community, it's creating a little bit of confusion. And so, if you really want to capture the value of community, helps to understand how it stands in contrast to some of the other ways of engaging folks.
Right. That sounds like the fan club model when you're talking about how brands are building so-called community, and that distinction that Jill was just making is so important. As we wrap up, I was so intrigued by in the first episode of the Community Experience, your podcast that I highly recommend to folks. You talk about how challenging it can be to connect to new people, at networking events, in a social setting, certainly during these times of COVID. And it's particularly a challenge for a lot of listeners who are at conferences. They're, being introduced to new people, and it can be, it's hard for anyone to go into a room when you don't know anybody. But given the importance of connection, any ideas about one thing or something, relatively easy that listeners could do to make this often uncomfortable situation less painful? So, the next time they're in a place with a lot of new faces, or, maybe that's IRL or in gallery view, depending on what the situation is. One thing they could do so that they're actually better and maybe more comfortable in reaching out to at least start this idea of connection and community. Tony, do you want to address that first?
Sure, Mark. So I would say first and foremost, a lot of the groundwork that leads to a greater chance for connection happens before you ever show up. The context really defines a lot of this. Why are you in the same room as these other people? Now, if it's for, a very innocuous reason, you can start conversation with that very innocuous thing in common, and then dig a little bit deeper into, why is this topic of interest to this person, and why is it important to them? Asking the 5 whys, you could dig a little bit deeper into their story. And of course, showing somebody that you're actually giving them your full attention. If you ask somebody a question, pay attention to what they say. Don't interrupt them, not even with ahas. Oh yeah. Just listen to them, make it clear that you are paying full attention to them. And eventually they'll ask you about you. And then, they'll be interested to hear what you have to say too, usually. And, but if you pick a context where there is a shared commitment to growth of some kind, if it's a fitness group or, a support group, something like that, where there's an explicit sense that everybody's here to improve or learn or grow in some way, then you can tap into that all that much more. And I do think that, some of the deepest bonds are formed around vulnerability and our desire to grow, that there's something that we're working towards that we can help each other with that's important to us. And so trying to create those kinds of contexts or look for those opportunities, I think is good way to get yourself in the right kinds of situations.
Yeah, thanks for that very practical kind of advice too, because it is just generally challenging, and that's really strong, specific things that people can do to kind of lower their own temperature and just kind of ease into this as they're meeting new people. Jill, do you have some thoughts on it?
Yeah, it's hard to follow Tony up after that because he is the absolute master of ceremonies for like he knows how to connect with people. This is his thing. Um, as a proclaimed introvert, although people always disagree, they're like, no, you're not. But I am. And like a happy hour after a conference where I don't know anybody, like I'm good. I think I'll just go to my room. I'm not, that's my worst nightmare. But I've learned over the years, and I find this is really valuable. So just talking about in person for anybody listening, this has helped me a lot just day to day is if I see somebody or, just want to interact in some way, like maybe I'm at the bookstore and a lady has a really pretty scarf on and I'm like, oh, I love your scarf. And if they respond kind of like, like gruff, and don't take it personally. It isn't about you. They just aren't interested in having a conversation, and that's okay. Maybe they're sick of hearing that question because it's such a nice scarf, right? But just not taking it personally and be like, all right, like we've all been there where someone says something to us and we just don't want to engage. And it's not like, ooh, that person in particular. It's just whatever mindset you're in. And so same with a conference or even on, a Zoom call in the gallery view. Don't take other people's reactions to you personally. It helps you then not feel like a little micro trauma about the thing and be like, oh, I'm never doing that again. That was awkward, because you're like, oh, they're not having a great day, whatever. And then so you don't have as much of a block the next time you want to talk to someone. And maybe it's deeper than nice scarf, maybe it's you're at a conference, you're at a happy hour, you bump past someone and it's like, oh, hey, what'd you think? What things did you go to? And you'll know if they want to talk or not. And if they don't, no worries. On to the next.
Yeah.
I want to add something quick, Mark, about introvert versus extrovert. First of all, introvert does not mean antisocial. And it's a distinction that we need to kind of practice as community leaders. And maybe why, Jill identifies as introvert and people deny it. You can be really great at being social and be an introvert if you know kind of how to manage that. And then as a community organizer, designing for introverted and extroverted interactions, super valuable. And then as an attendee, recognizing that different people interact in different ways. And then extroverted interaction is very face-to-face, high energy, maybe high speed, like right at you. Whereas you could actually have a really great social interaction with somebody in a more introverted way, simply by slowing it down, taking it maybe a little more side to side than front to front, and, putting the energy kind of out there and being in your energy together, kind of, off to the side, like, oh, those clouds are crazy over there, and like gently inviting conversation and connection to happen in a way that's more compatible with their energy. So all of those things, super valuable at every level.
Yeah, I just love that. I mean, I've had Jennifer Conweiler on the show a couple of times, and she's an introvert. That's her whole focus, is introversion. And it was interesting, Jill, when you were talking about, the conference, but then the happy hour. I mean, one of her major themes is that introverts love to be social and have interaction, but they need time to recharge. So if they're in between, say, so if there were two activities right in a row, maybe after the first one, someone just, an introvert maybe just wanted a little time to decompress and exhale a bit before going into the second one. Doesn't mean that they don't love, being around people, which was so interesting when you were mentioning energy, Tony. It's like, I consider myself an extrovert. I've got two kids. One is definitely an introvert and the other is an extrovert. And I can see with my daughter, who's the introvert, she needs time in between these activities just to go in her room and, practice her electric guitar or just be away from people.
As the daughter of an introvert, I appreciate that you recognize that, because some parents don't, and they're like, come on. And you're like, oh my gosh, I need a nap.
Well, it was a learning experience too, really. I mean, part of it came from talking to experts, on the show, and then also kind of seeing her. And, it's also funny how society sort of, the person who's always out there, the go-getter, all the time. That's something that we prize. But no, my daughter will talk a lot. She loves that. And then it's like, okay, off to like make a candle.
Yes. Oh my gosh. If she ever wants to hang out, let me know. I'll make candles.
They're great. Well, this has been wonderful, this conversation. And I really do feel what you're both doing and what SPI is doing is a service to what we need right now. It's an antidote to so much of the loneliness and disconnection that all of us are experiencing or trying to navigate. Work from home sounds wonderful, but maybe, it would kind of be nice to mix it up a little bit and have conversation with other people besides a UPS and Amazon person once in a while. So explaining and showing people how to do it, both IRL and then virtually, it's just wonderful for all of us, I believe. That's what we need right now. So thank you both for doing what you're doing.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having us on the show. And it's always a delight.
And listeners, I want to thank you for being here on this episode of When Science Speaks. And I hope you'll be back next time for the next episode of When Science Speaks.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to click subscribe. Check us out on the web at whensciencespeaks.com, and we'll see you next time.